In the primordial darkness before the first dawn of creation, when the cosmic serpent Shisha still coiled in the infinite void, and the breath of Brahma had not yet stirred the waters of existence, there existed a prophecy whispered among the celestial architects. They spoke of a child who would be born from wind and devotion, whose strength would shake the foundations of reality itself, and whose loyalty would become the eternal standard against which all devotion would be measured throughout the endless cycles of time. This is not merely a story. This is the truth that echoes through every heartbeat of the universe. In the ancient realm of Kishkindha, where mountains rose like the spines of sleeping giants and forests harbored creatures whose powers defied mortal comprehension, there ruled a Vanara king whose legend had already begun to transcend the boundaries of his earthly domain. Kesari was his name, and his strength was not merely physical. It was the manifestation of dharmic power accumulated through countless lifetimes of righteous action. When he struck the earth with his fist, the tremors could be felt in the celestial realms. When he roared in battle, demons 3 kingdoms away would feel their courage waver like flames in a hurricane. But Kesari's true greatness lay not in his devastating power, but in the nobility of his heart. He had been tested by the gods themselves, offered kingdoms and immortality in exchange for compromising his principles, and had refused every temptation with the same unwavering resolve. His court attracted not sycophants seeking favor, but warriors seeking wisdom, scholars seeking truth, and the desperate seeking justice. Under his rule, the weak found protection, the hungry found sustenance, and the lost found purpose. The Trikuta mountains that formed the heart of his kingdom were no ordinary peaks. These were the bones of ancient titans who had fallen in the first war between order and chaos, their petrified forms now serving as the foundation for a civilization that honored their sacrifice. The forests that carpeted their slopes contained trees whose roots reached down to the underground rivers that connected all the sacred waters of the world, and whose branches stretched high enough to brush against the lower heavens during certain celestial alignments. Within these mystical forests lived creatures that existed nowhere else in creation. Luminescent deer whose antlers could heal any wound, birds whose songs could reveal hidden truths, and serpents whose scales contained the accumulated wisdom of ages. The Vanaras who called this realm home had learned to live in harmony with these wonders, developing a civilization that balanced martial prowess with spiritual sophistication in ways that even the gods found remarkable. The celestial courts of Indra, king of the Devas, buzzed with tales of this extraordinary Vanara king. Divine messengers who traveled between realms carried stories of Kesari's wisdom and valor to audiences that included beings who had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of universes. Even the Apsaras, those divine dancers whose beauty could entrance gods and demons alike, whose movements could influence the very fabric of reality, spoke of the Vanara king with a respect they rarely accorded to earthly rulers. Among these celestial maidens, there lived one whose grace surpassed that of her 10,000 sisters, whose devotion to righteousness had earned her special favor among the divine hierarchy, and whose destiny was intertwined with cosmic purposes that even she did not fully comprehend. Her name was Anjana, and her story carried within it the weight of a curse that had fundamentally altered her existence, while simultaneously preparing her for a role that would reshape the very fabric of cosmic history. In her previous celestial form, she had been Punjikasthala, an Apsara extraordinary beauty who served in Indra's court during the Golden Age, when the boundaries between heaven and earth were more permeable than they would later become. Her dancing could make flowers bloom in winter, could cause rivers to reverse their courses in appreciation, could bring tears of joy to the eyes of beings who had not experienced emotion for millennia. During a performance before the great sage Narada, that divine wanderer whose music could unlock the secrets of the universe and whose words could alter the course of destiny, Her attention had wandered for a single moment. Perhaps she had glimpsed something in the cosmic tapestry that surrounded them, some thread of fate that called to her across the boundaries of time. Perhaps she had sensed, even then, the child she was destined to bear, and the role she would play in the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Whatever the cause, that momentary lapse had profound consequences. Narada, whose quick temper when his spiritual discourse was interrupted was legendary even among the gods, cursed her with words that crackled with divine power. You who cannot maintain focus even in the presence of cosmic truth shall be born on earth as a Vanara maiden, destined to remain in that form until you give birth to an incarnation of Lord Shiva himself. The curse, while appearing harsh to those who witnessed it, carried within it the seeds of a greater cosmic purpose that Narada himself may not have fully understood. For the universe operates according to principles that transcend individual intentions, weaving even apparent misfortunes into patterns that serve the ultimate triumph of Dharma over Adharma. Punjikastala's transformation into Anjana was not merely punishment, but preparation, a cosmic alchemy that would refine her celestial essence through earthly experience, tempering her divine nature with the wisdom that comes only from mortal struggle. Her birth as a Vanara princess in the mountains of southern India marked the beginning of a chain of events that would culminate in the birth of one of the most revered figures in all creation. Anjana's earthly form retained much of her celestial beauty, though adapted to her Vanara nature in ways that created a unique magnificence. Her eyes held the depth of ancient wisdom accumulated through eons of celestial existence, pools of liquid gold that seemed to contain entire universes within their depths. Her movements carried the fluid grace of her Apsara heritage, each gesture a dance, each step a prayer, each breath a meditation on the divine principles that governed all existence. Her fur was not the ordinary brown or gray of common Vanaras, but a lustrous golden bronze that seemed to glow with inner light, especially during the sacred hours of dawn and dusk, when the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Her voice, when she spoke or sang, carried harmonics that resonated with frequencies beyond normal hearing, affecting the consciousness of listeners in ways they could not consciously perceive but deeply felt. Word of her extraordinary beauty and noble character spread across the Vanara kingdoms like wildfire carried on divine winds. Princes from distant realms sent emissaries bearing gifts of unprecedented value, hoping to win her favor. Sages who had renounced all worldly attachments found themselves making pilgrimages to glimpse her, claiming that her presence accelerated spiritual development in ways that years of meditation could not achieve. But Anjana remained unmoved by these attentions. Her heart focused on the spiritual practices that she somehow knew were preparing her for a destiny she could not yet fully comprehend. She spent her days in meditation and service, her nights in contemplation of the cosmic mysteries that her celestial memories allowed her to partially perceive. She knew, with a certainty that transcended rational understanding, that her curse was actually a blessing in disguise, and that patience would reveal its true purpose. When word of Anjana reached Khazari's ears, carried by travelers who had witnessed her radiance, the Vanara king felt something stir within his heart that he had never experienced before. It was not mere attraction. Khazari had encountered beautiful females throughout his life and had remained unmoved by their charms. This was something deeper, a recognition that transcended physical perception, as if his soul had suddenly remembered a connection that existed before either of them had taken their current forms. The gathering of Vanara chieftains, where they first met, was held during the festival of Kartik Purnima, when the full moon's light was believed to carry special blessings from the celestial realms. representatives from every Vanara kingdom had assembled to discuss matters of mutual concern, trade agreements, defensive alliances, and the growing threat of demon incursions along their southern borders. Kesari had attended such gatherings countless times before, finding them necessary but tedious exercises in political maneuvering. But when Anjana entered the assembly hall, accompanied by her father and the retinue appropriate to her royal status, time itself seemed to pause. The torches that illuminated the hall flickered and then burned brighter, as if responding to her presence. The air became charged with an energy that made every hair on every Vanara's body stand on end. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and in that moment, both understood that their connection transcended the physical realm. It was as if the cosmos itself had orchestrated their encounter, arranging circumstances across countless lifetimes to bring them together at precisely this moment, in precisely this place, for purposes that would reshape the destiny of worlds. Their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of the Trikuta Mountains, where Kesari would demonstrate his strength by moving massive boulders to create gardens for Anjana's pleasure, not merely shifting stones, but reshaping the very landscape to create spaces of such beauty that celestial beings would later descend to admire them. He carved waterfalls from solid cliff faces, redirected underground rivers to create pools of crystal-clear water, and planted gardens with seeds he had collected from the most sacred groves in all the Vanara territories. Anjana, in turn, shared with him the celestial knowledge she had acquired during her time in Indra's court, secrets of the universe that had never before been revealed to earthly beings. She taught him meditation techniques that could expand consciousness beyond normal limitations, mantras whose vibrations could influence the fundamental forces of nature, and philosophical insights that transformed his understanding of his own existence and purpose. Their love deepened through shared adventures that tested both their capabilities and their compatibility. Hunting expeditions where Kesari's prowess complemented Anjana's strategic wisdom, leading them to victories against prey that had eluded the greatest hunters for generations. Explorations of hidden valleys and secret caves where they discovered artifacts from ages so ancient that even the gods had forgotten them. Quiet moments where they discussed the deeper mysteries of existence and dharma, their conversations lasting through entire nights and leaving both transformed by the exchange of perspectives. The marriage between Kesari and Anjana was celebrated throughout the Vanara territories with festivities that lasted for 3 full months. Kings and chieftains from every corner of the known world sent representatives bearing gifts. Sages who had not left their meditation caves for centuries emerged to offer blessings. Even celestial beings, disguised as ordinary travelers, attended the ceremonies to witness the union that cosmic prophecies had foretold. The wedding rituals themselves incorporated elements from both earthly and celestial traditions, creating ceremonies of such power that the very fabric of reality seemed to shimmer during their performance. The sacred fire that witnessed their vows burned with 7 different colors, each representing a different aspect of their cosmic connection. The mantras chanted by the officiating priests resonated through multiple dimensions simultaneously, registering their union in the records of heaven as well as earth. The union represented more than the joining of 2 individuals. It symbolized the merger of earthly strength with celestial wisdom, creating a foundation upon which something extraordinary could be built. The guests who witnessed the ceremonies understood, even if they could not articulate it, that they were participating in events whose significance extended far beyond the immediate celebration. However, despite their deep love and the blessings of their subjects, years passed without the arrival of offspring. This absence became a source of growing concern for the royal couple, not merely because of the political implications of lacking an heir, but because both sensed that their union was meant to produce something of cosmic significance. The prophecy that had shaped Anjana's curse spoke of a child who would be an incarnation of Lord Shiva himself, but the path to achieving this blessing remained unclear. Anjana understood that her curse could only be lifted through the birth of a divine child, but the mechanism for attracting such a blessing eluded her despite years of prayer and spiritual practice. She consulted with the wisest sages in the Vanara territories, performed elaborate rituals prescribed by ancient texts, and made pilgrimages to sacred sites throughout the known world. Each effort brought her closer to understanding what was required, but the final breakthrough remained elusive. Guided by her celestial knowledge, and driven by an inner calling that grew stronger with each passing day, she finally embarked upon a penance of unprecedented intensity. Her chosen place of worship was a secluded peak in the Anjana Mountains, a location where the veil between the earthly and divine realms was particularly thin, where the cosmic energies that flowed through creation were concentrated in ways that amplified spiritual practices beyond their normal effectiveness. The peak she selected had been sacred since before the current age of the world began. Ancient texts spoke of it as the place where Lord Shiva himself had once meditated during the primordial era, leaving behind residual energies that made the location uniquely suited for practices aimed at attracting his attention. The climb to reach this peak was treacherous enough to discourage casual visitors, ensuring that Anjana would have the solitude necessary for the intense focus her penance would require. The penance Anjana undertook was extraordinary in its intensity and duration, pushing the boundaries of what even celestial beings were believed capable of enduring. For 12 years, a number sacred to Lord Shiva and representing a complete cycle of cosmic time, she maintained absolute focus on the great god, surviving on nothing but fruits and water during the first phase, later reducing her intake to just leaves, and finally subsisting on air alone as her body transcended its normal physical requirements. Her daily routine began before dawn, with elaborate purification rituals that cleansed not only her physical form, but also the subtle bodies that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. These rituals involved bathing in waters collected from sacred rivers, anointing herself with substances prepared according to ancient formulas, and performing physical postures that aligned her energy centers with the cosmic forces she sought to attract. Following purification came hours of meditation, where she would visualize Lord Shiva in his various forms, as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, whose movements created and destroyed universes, as Ardhanarishvara, the perfect union of masculine and feminine principles, as Dakshinamurti, the supreme teacher, who transmitted wisdom through silence, and as Mahakala, the Lord of Time, who transcended all temporal limitations. During her penance, Anjana's physical form underwent a remarkable transformation that reflected the spiritual alchemy occurring within her consciousness. Her Vanara features became more refined, almost luminous, as if her intense spiritual practice was burning away all earthly impurities and revealing the celestial essence that had always existed beneath her mortal form. Her fur took on an ethereal quality, seeming to glow with inner light even in complete darkness. Her voice, when she chanted the sacred mantras, resonated with such purity that even the birds would fall silent to listen, and wild animals that normally fled from any presence would gather around her meditation spot in peaceful congregation. The very air around her seemed charged with divine energy, creating an atmosphere that visitors described as simultaneously peaceful and electrifying. Flowers would bloom out of season in her presence, and the weather patterns around her mountain peak became noticeably different from surrounding areas. The 12 years of her penance were marked by tests that would have broken lesser beings. Demons sent by forces opposed to her success, attempted to disturb her concentration through terrifying apparitions and seductive illusions. Natural disasters, earthquakes, storms, and floods threatened her physical safety. Periods of doubt and despair assaulted her mind, questioning whether her efforts would ever bear fruit. Through all these challenges, Anjana maintained her focus with determination that impressed even the celestial observers who monitored her progress. Her commitment never wavered, her practices never faltered, and her faith in the ultimate success of her mission remained absolute, despite all evidence that might have suggested otherwise. Lord Shiva, pleased with Anjana's unwavering devotion and recognizing the cosmic necessity of her request, decided to grant her boon. However, the divine plan required a specific mechanism for the birth of the promised child, one that would combine multiple divine essences in ways that would create a being of unprecedented capabilities. Rather than manifesting directly, Shiva chose to work through Vayu, the wind god, who possessed the unique ability to carry divine essence across all realms of existence. This choice was not arbitrary, but reflected deep cosmic logic. Vayu was the breath of life itself, the force that animated all living beings, the carrier of prayers from earth to heaven and blessings from heaven to earth. His domain extended far beyond mere atmospheric phenomena to encompass the very principle of movement and vitality that made existence possible. Vayu's relationship with Shiva was particularly close, as the wind god served as the vehicle for Shiva's cosmic dance, carrying the rhythm of creation and destruction throughout the universe. When Shiva performed the Tandava, the dance that maintained the cosmic order, it was Vayu who transmitted the vibrations of that dance to every corner of existence, ensuring that the patterns of creation and dissolution reached even the most remote regions of reality. On a day when the cosmic alignments were particularly favorable, with multiple planets positioned in configurations that occurred only once in several millennia, when the boundaries between dimensions were at their thinnest, and when the accumulated merit of Anjana's penance had reached its peak, Vayu appeared before the meditating devotee. His form was magnificent yet terrifying, a swirling mass of wind and light that seemed to contain within it the essence of storms, gentle breezes, and the very breath of creation. The air around Anjana's meditation spot began to move in spirals, creating patterns that seemed to write divine mantras in space itself. The temperature fluctuated wildly as different aspects of Vayu's nature manifested in rapid succession: the cold of mountain peaks, the warmth of tropical winds, the freshness of ocean breezes, and the heat of desert storms. Vayu's blessing took the form of a divine essence that merged with Anjana's being during her deepest state of meditation. This was not a physical union but a cosmic one, where the wind god's divine energy combined with the spiritual purity Anjana had achieved through her years of penance, and with the essence of Shiva that Vayu carried as his eternal burden and privilege. The moment of conception was marked by extraordinary natural phenomena that were observed throughout the three worlds. Flowers rained from clear skies across vast regions, their petals carrying fragrances that had never before been experienced on Earth. The earth trembled gently, not with the violence of earthquakes, but with what witnesses described as a shiver of joy, as if the planet itself recognized the momentous nature of what was occurring. A divine fragrance filled the air for miles around the mountain peak, a scent that combined the essence of every sacred flower, every precious incense, and every blessed substance known to exist. Those who experienced this fragrance reported that it triggered profound spiritual experiences, awakening memories of past lives and glimpses of cosmic truths that normally remained hidden from mortal perception. The pregnancy that followed defied all natural laws in ways that confirmed the divine nature of the child being formed within Anjana's womb. She experienced no discomfort or physical limitations. Instead, she felt increasingly energized and spiritually elevated, as if the growing presence within her was sharing its divine vitality with her mortal form. Her unborn child seemed to communicate with her through subtle movements and vibrations that felt like mantras being chanted from within her womb. During meditation, she could perceive the consciousness that was developing within her, a vast awareness that already encompassed knowledge and capabilities far beyond anything she'd imagined possible. The child seemed to be teaching her even before birth, sharing insights about cosmic mysteries that expanded her understanding in ways her years of celestial existence had not achieved. During this period, she received visions of the future, glimpses of the great deeds her son would perform, and the crucial role he would play in the cosmic battle between good and evil. She saw him leaping across oceans, carrying mountains through the sky, facing demons whose power would terrify armies, and serving a divine prince whose mission would restore Dharma to a world threatened by the forces of darkness. These visions were not mere dreams, but prophetic revelations that carried the weight of cosmic certainty. She understood that she was carrying not merely a child but a force of nature, a divine instrument whose purpose was woven into the very fabric of universal destiny. The birth occurred during the most auspicious moment possible, at the precise intersection of multiple favorable planetary positions, during the full moon of Chaitra month, when the cosmic energies were perfectly aligned for the arrival of a divine being. The labor was swift and painless, as if the child was eager to enter the world and begin his destined mission, and as if the universe itself was facilitating his arrival by removing all obstacles that might delay his emergence. The moment of birth was accompanied by phenomena that announced to all three worlds that something unprecedented had occurred. Thunder rolled across clear skies, its sound carrying harmonics that spelled out sacred mantras in languages that only the most learned sages could understand. Lightning illuminated the mountains without any clouds present, its patterns forming symbols of divine significance that were later recorded in sacred texts. A wind arose that carried the sound of celestial conch shells and drums, as if the heavenly hosts were celebrating the arrival of one who would become their champion. The stars themselves seemed to rearrange their positions momentarily, forming configurations that astrologers would later identify as the most favorable birth chart ever recorded for any being in cosmic history. The newborn's appearance immediately revealed his divine nature in ways that left no doubt about his extraordinary origins. His body glowed with an inner radiance that seemed to pulse with each breath, a golden light that was visible even in the brightness of day. His eyes held an intelligence that appeared ancient despite his infant form, eyes that seemed to assess and understand the nature of existence itself from the moment they first opened. His limbs were perfectly proportioned, but already showed signs of extraordinary strength. His tiny fists could grip with surprising force, leaving impressions in materials that should have been far too hard for any infant to effect. His movements displayed a coordination that defied his newborn status, suggesting a consciousness that had already mastered physical existence in previous forms. Most remarkably, the child's face bore distinctive features that would later earn him his primary name. His jaw was prominently developed, giving him an appearance of determination and strength that seemed almost comical on such a young face, yet somehow perfectly appropriate for one destined for greatness. His cheeks were full and rounded, and his overall robust build immediately suggested the immense power that lay dormant within his small frame. The naming ceremony took place 7 days after the birth, attended by Vanara chieftains from across the region and presided over by the wisest sages available. The gathering included beings who had traveled vast distances to witness the naming of a child whose birth had been announced by cosmic phenomena visible throughout the three worlds. Each name bestowed upon the child carried deep significance and revealed different aspects of his divine nature and destiny. The primary name, Hanuman, derived from the Sanskrit terms Hanu meaning jaw and man meaning prominent or disfigured, referred to his distinctive facial features that marked him as unique among all Vanaras. This name would become synonymous with devotion itself, spoken with reverence by countless beings throughout all future ages. Anjaneya, meaning son of Anjana, acknowledged his earthly mother and the extraordinary circumstances of his birth through her divine penance. This name served to honor Anjana's role in bringing about this cosmic blessing through her unwavering devotion and sacrifice, ensuring that her contribution to universal history would never be forgotten. Maruti, derived from Marut, referring to the wind gods or storm deities, recognized Vayu's role as his divine father and indicated the child's connection to the elemental forces of nature. This name suggested his future mastery over the wind and his ability to move with speed that defied normal physical limitations. Pavanaputra, meaning son of Pavana, emphasized his divine heritage and his role as a purifying force in the world. This name also suggested his future ability to traverse vast distances through the air and his mastery over the element of wind that would prove crucial in his greatest adventures. Each name carried with it specific blessings and prophecies that the assembled sages revealed during the ceremony. Ancient texts that had been consulted spoke of a child bearing these appellations who would possess strength equal to 100 elephants, the ability to leap across oceans, immunity to all weapons when serving righteousness, and the power to change his size at will from smaller than an atom to larger than mountains. The prophecies also indicated that he would serve as the devoted follower of an avatar of Vishnu and would play a crucial role in the restoration of Dharma during a time of great cosmic upheaval. The assembled sages and chieftains recognized that they were witnessing the birth of no ordinary Vanara, but of a being whose destiny was intertwined with the fate of the entire universe. As the ceremony concluded, and the blessings were sealed through sacred rituals, the infant Hanuman opened his eyes and looked at the assembled gathering with an awareness that made even the most experienced sages feel that they were being evaluated by a consciousness far vaster than their own. In that moment, all present understood that the age of heroes had begun, and that the child before them would become the standard against which all devotion, all strength, and all service would be measured throughout the endless cycles of time. As Hanuman grew from infant to toddler within the protective embrace of the Trikuta Mountains, his extraordinary nature manifested in ways that both delighted and alarmed his parents, challenged the understanding of the wisest sages, and created legends that spread throughout the Vanara territories, with the speed of wildfire carried on his father's divine winds. Unlike ordinary Vanara children who required months to develop basic motor skills, Hanuman demonstrated remarkable physical coordination within weeks of his birth. His first steps came not as tentative wobbles, but as confident bounds that covered distances no infant should manage, leaps that carried him across entire rooms and left his caretakers scrambling to keep pace with his movements. When he grasped objects, his tiny fingers left impressions in stone, and when he played, trees would sway from the force of his innocent games. The royal nursery required constant reinforcement, as walls cracked under the impact of his casual movements and furniture splintered when he used it for climbing practice. The craftsman assigned to maintain his living quarters eventually developed specialized techniques for creating structures that could withstand his unintentional destruction. Anjana watched her son with a mixture of maternal pride and growing concern that kept her awake through many nights. The child's appetite was prodigious. He could consume fruits meant for a dozen adult Vanaras and still cry for more, his hunger seemingly bottomless, as if his divine nature required fuel that exceeded normal biological requirements. His sleep patterns defied normal infant behavior in ways that exhausted his caretakers. Instead of the lengthy rest periods typical of newborns, Hanuman would sleep deeply for short intervals, then awaken with energy that seemed to crackle in the air around him like lightning before a storm. During these wakeful periods, he would explore every corner of their mountain dwelling, his curiosity leading him to attempt feats that should have been impossible for one so young. By his first birthday, Hanuman had grown to the size of a Vanara child twice his age, his muscles already showing definition that spoke of incredible latent strength. His facial features had become more pronounced, with his distinctive jaw giving him an appearance of determination that seemed almost comical on such a young face, yet somehow perfectly appropriate for his divine nature. His eyes held an intelligence that unnerved visitors. They seemed to assess and understand far more than any child should comprehend, evaluating the character and intentions of everyone who entered his presence with a penetrating awareness that made even the most powerful chieftains feel that they were being judged by cosmic standards. The Vanara community around the royal residence had grown accustomed to unusual occurrences whenever young Hanuman was present. Massive boulders would mysteriously shift position after he played nearby, their new locations often forming patterns that sages later identified as sacred geometric configurations. Trees that had stood for centuries would suddenly develop new growth patterns, their branches reaching in directions that followed the paths of his daily adventures. The mountain streams would change their courses slightly, as if responding to some invisible force that accompanied the divine child's presence. Fish would leap from the water when he approached. Birds would gather in unprecedented numbers around his play areas, and even the most dangerous predators would become docile in his vicinity, recognizing instinctively that they were in the presence of a being whose power transcended the normal hierarchies of nature. Kesari attempted to channel his son's boundless energy through traditional Vanara training methods, introducing him to basic combat techniques and physical exercises used to develop young warriors. However, these proved woefully inadequate for Hanuman's capabilities, in ways that forced the king to completely rethink his approach to his son's education. Wooden practice weapons would splinter in his grasp before he learned to control his strength, their fragments scattering across training grounds with enough force to embed themselves in distant trees. Training partners, even adult Vanaras known for their resilience, would find themselves overwhelmed by the child's unrestrained enthusiasm during sparring sessions, often requiring medical attention after encounters that Hanuman considered gentle play. The most concerning aspect of Hanuman's development was his complete lack of fear, a characteristic that would later prove essential for his divine mission, but which created constant anxiety for his parents during his childhood. While caution and risk assessment were crucial survival traits that Vanara parents carefully instilled in their offspring, Hanuman seemed incapable of recognizing danger in any form. He would leap from heights that would kill ordinary beings, confident in abilities he had not yet learned to fully control, landing with impacts that created craters in solid rock. He would approach wild predators with the same friendly curiosity he showed to harmless creatures, treating massive bears and tigers as potential playmates rather than threats. His divine aura somehow communicating to these animals that aggression would be futile. This fearlessness reached its most dramatic expression during Hanuman's second year, when his curiosity about the world beyond the mountains intensified to the point where it could no longer be contained by parental supervision or physical barriers. He had begun to notice the daily journey of the sun across the sky, watching with fascination as the golden orb rose each morning and set each evening, its movements creating patterns that his developing mind found endlessly intriguing. To his young mind, the sun appeared to be nothing more than an enormous, perfectly ripe fruit hanging in the sky, a fruit that surely would be delicious and satisfying to one with his tremendous appetite. The fact that it hung in the sky presented no obstacle to his thinking. He had already demonstrated an ability to leap tremendous distances, and this would simply be a longer jump than usual. The morning that would become legendary throughout the three worlds began like any other in the royal household. Anjana had risen before dawn to perform her daily prayers, leaving Hanuman sleeping peacefully in their dwelling. The sun had just appeared over the eastern peaks, its golden light painting the mountain slopes in brilliant hues that seemed to call out to the divine child with irresistible attraction. As the first rays reached their home, Hanuman awakened and immediately noticed the beautiful golden sphere that seemed to beckon to him from its position in the sky. His child's logic was simple and direct. The sun looked exactly like the golden mangoes that grew in the celestial groves his mother had described in her stories, only much larger, and therefore presumably much more delicious. Without hesitation or consideration of the consequences, without informing anyone of his intentions or waiting for permission that would certainly have been denied, Hanuman bounded from his sleeping place and launched himself into the air with a force that shook the entire mountain. The impact of his departure created a crater where he had stood and sent shock waves through the surrounding terrain that were felt for miles in every direction. His leap was not the simple arc that physics would normally dictate, but rather a sustained flight that carried him higher and higher into the atmosphere. His Vanara form began to expand as he rose, growing larger with each moment until he reached proportions that dwarfed the peaks below, a transformation that occurred instinctively, without conscious direction, as his divine nature responded to the demands of his ambitious goal. The sight of a massive Vanara child streaking across the sky toward the sun created immediate panic throughout the celestial realms. Divine beings who had been going about their morning routines suddenly found themselves witnessing an event that threatened the very order of creation. The sun, Surya, was not merely a celestial body, but a deity whose daily journey maintained the cosmic balance that allowed life to flourish across all worlds. Hanuman's approach toward the sun was characterized by pure determination and joy. His face bore an expression of delighted anticipation as he drew closer to what he perceived as his magnificent breakfast. His powerful limbs propelled him through the thin atmosphere with increasing speed, and his eyes remained fixed on his golden target with unwavering focus that nothing could distract. The wind created by his passage began to affect weather patterns across vast regions, generating storms and atmospheric disturbances that had no natural explanation. Ships at sea found themselves battling sudden gales. Farmers watched in confusion as clouds formed and dissipated in patterns that defied all meteorological understanding. Sages in meditation felt disturbances in the cosmic order that interrupted their concentration and filled them with foreboding. Surya himself watched the approaching child with a mixture of amazement and alarm that he had not experienced since the earliest ages of creation. The sun god could perceive Hanuman's divine nature and recognize that this was no ordinary Vanara. The child's aura blazed with power that rivaled that of major deities. But the cosmic implications of allowing the child to reach him were staggering beyond calculation. If Hanuman succeeded in his attempt to consume the sun, the resulting disruption would plunge all worlds into darkness and chaos, potentially ending countless lives and destroying the delicate balance that maintained universal order. The cycles of day and night that governed all biological processes would cease. The warmth that sustained life would vanish. The very fabric of reality, which depended on the sun's consistent presence, would begin to unravel. The other celestial beings quickly mobilized in response to this unprecedented crisis. Messengers raced through the heavenly realms, carrying warnings and summoning the most powerful deities to address a situation that had no precedent in cosmic history. The urgency was absolute. Every moment that passed brought the divine child closer to the sun and closer to a catastrophe that would affect every living being in existence. Indra, king of the gods and wielder of the thunderbolt Vajra, was summoned immediately to address the situation. From his celestial palace, he could see Hanuman's massive form approaching the sun with alarming speed. The child's size had continued to increase during his flight, and he now appeared large enough to actually encompass the solar deity if he succeeded in his goal. Indra recognized that conventional diplomatic solutions were impossible. There was no time to communicate with the child or convince him to abandon his quest, even if such communication were feasible across the vast distance involved. The child's single-minded focus on his perceived prize left no room for negotiation or reason. The decision to use force against a divine child was not made lightly. Indra understood the potential consequences of attacking the son of Vayu. The wind god's wrath could have devastating effects on all the worlds that depended on air for survival. But the alternative, allowing the destruction of cosmic order, was unacceptable by any calculation. The thunderbolt Vajra had been crafted by the divine architect Vishwakarma from the bones of the sage Dadichi, whose sacrifice had provided the material for the most powerful weapon in existence. Its power was sufficient to shatter mountains and destroy the mightiest demons. Using such a weapon against a child, even a divine one, represented a desperate measure taken in desperate circumstances. Indra's thunderbolt struck Hanuman with devastating force, just as the child was reaching toward the sun with outstretched arms, his fingers almost touching the golden surface that had drawn him across the sky. The impact was tremendous, creating a flash of light visible across multiple worlds and generating thunder that echoed through the heavens for several minutes. The divine weapon struck Hanuman directly on his prominent jaw, the very feature from which his primary name was derived, sending him tumbling through the sky in an uncontrolled descent. The child's cries of pain and confusion as he plummeted earthward carried across the atmosphere, reaching the ears of his divine father with clarity that transcended physical distance. The fall from such a tremendous height would have been fatal to any ordinary being, but Hanuman's divine constitution protected him from complete destruction. However, the thunderbolt's power was sufficient to cause significant injury to his jaw and chin, fracturing the bone and causing severe swelling that would leave permanent marks that would later serve as reminders of this cosmic incident and symbols of his survival of divine punishment. Vayu's reaction to his son's injury was immediate and catastrophic. The wind god's paternal rage knew no bounds when he perceived that Indra had struck down his child with the very weapon that had been used to slay countless demons and asuras. The fact that cosmic necessity had motivated Indra's action meant nothing to Vayu in that moment of overwhelming fury. His son had been attacked, and the perpetrator would face consequences that matched the severity of the offense. The withdrawal of air from the universe began gradually but accelerated rapidly as Vayu's anger intensified. Initially, the effects were subtle. Breezes died away, leaving an unnatural stillness that made all beings feel vaguely uncomfortable. The flags that normally fluttered from temple spires hung limp. The leaves that should have rustled in the wind became motionless. The very atmosphere seemed to hold its breath. However, as Vayu continued to withhold his presence from the three worlds, the consequences became increasingly severe. Breathing became labored for all living creatures, from the mightiest gods to the smallest insects. Plants began to wilt as the air they required for their life processes became unavailable. The ocean surfaces, normally stirred by constant winds, became mirror still, creating an eerie calm that disrupted marine ecosystems. Birds fell from the sky, unable to find the air currents necessary for flight. Fires began to die as they were deprived of the oxygen necessary for combustion. The very flames of sacrificial rituals, the sacred fires that maintained the connection between earth and heaven, flickered and threatened to extinguish entirely. Within hours, the crisis had reached proportions that threatened the existence of life itself. Divine beings found themselves struggling to maintain their forms without the vital air that sustained all existence. Even the gods, despite their immortal nature, discovered that their powers were diminished without Vayu's cooperation, as the wind god's domain extended far beyond mere atmospheric phenomena to encompass the very breath of life that animated all beings. Brahma, the creator deity, recognized that immediate action was necessary to prevent universal catastrophe. The cosmic balance that he had carefully established during the creation of the universe was being destroyed by Vayu's justified but ultimately destructive response to his son's injury. A delegation of the most powerful gods was hastily assembled to approach the wind god and negotiate a resolution that would restore air to the universe while addressing his legitimate grievances. The gods found Vayu in his celestial domain, cradling the unconscious form of his injured son, while his rage continued to manifest as the ongoing withdrawal of air from all worlds. Hanuman's jaw bore the clear marks of Indra's thunderbolt, swollen and discolored, with fractures that would heal but leave permanent evidence of the divine weapon's impact. The sight of the injured child stirred sympathy even among the gods who had initially supported Indra's necessary action. The contrast between Hanuman's innocent intentions and the devastating consequences he had suffered created an emotional response that transcended political calculations and cosmic necessities. Brahma approached Vayu with the reverence due to one of the fundamental forces of creation, acknowledging both the wind god's justified anger and the cosmic necessity that had motivated Indra's attack. The creator deity's words carried the weight of absolute authority, but they were tempered with genuine remorse for the circumstances that had led to the injury of an innocent child, regardless of the potential consequences of that child's actions. The negotiation that followed established a precedent for divine justice that would be remembered throughout cosmic history. Vayu's demand for compensation was reasonable. His son had been injured while acting according to his nature, without malicious intent or understanding of the consequences. The gods who had benefited from Indra's protection of cosmic order were therefore obligated to provide recompense that would not only heal the child's injuries, but grant him boons that reflected his divine status and future importance. Brahma, as the creator of all life, offered the most fundamental blessing: complete immortality that would protect Hanuman from death by any means throughout all future ages. This was not merely protection from violence or disease, but absolute immunity to the dissolution that eventually claimed all other beings, including many gods. The boon ensured that Hanuman would remain active and vital throughout all cosmic cycles, able to serve righteousness whenever the need arose. Shiva, recognizing in Hanuman a devotee whose dedication would eventually surpass that of most other beings, granted him invincibility in battle when fighting for righteous causes. This boon was carefully crafted to ensure that Hanuman's tremendous power would always serve Dharma, rather than personal ambition or destructive purposes. The blessing would make him undefeatable when acting as a champion of justice, but would not protect him if he ever turned his abilities toward evil ends. Indra, whose thunderbolt had caused the injury, offered a boon that was both generous and strategically wise. He granted Hanuman strength that would exceed that of the thunderbolt itself, ensuring that the child would never again be vulnerable to the weapon that had struck him down. Additionally, Indra bestowed upon him mastery over the very element that had been used against him, the power to command lightning and thunder for righteous purposes. The other gods contributed their own unique blessings, each reflecting their particular domains and powers. Surya, the sun god who had been the innocent target of Hanuman's original quest, granted him the ability to traverse any distance instantaneously and immunity to heat and fire. Varuna, lord of the oceans, blessed him with the power to cross any body of water and immunity to drowning. Kubera, the god of wealth, ensured that Hanuman would never lack for any material need while serving righteousness. Yama, the god of death, provided a blessing that complemented Brahma's gift of immortality by granting Hanuman the power to enter the realm of the dead when necessary for righteous purposes and return unharmed. This ability would prove crucial during future adventures when he would need to rescue others from seemingly impossible situations. Vishwakarma, the divine architect, blessed Hanuman with immunity to all weapons crafted by divine or demonic hands. Agni, the fire god, granted him protection from flames and the ability to use fire as a tool rather than a threat. Kamadeva, the god of desire, blessed him with the ability to assume any form he wished, ensuring that his appearance would never limit his effectiveness in service to righteousness. The healing of Hanuman's injuries required the combined efforts of multiple divine physicians led by the Ashwins, the celestial healers whose skills surpassed those of all earthly medical practitioners. However, even their remarkable abilities could not completely erase the effects of Indra's thunderbolt. While the fractures healed completely and the swelling subsided, the impact had left permanent marks on Hanuman's jaw and chin that would serve as lifelong reminders of this cosmic incident. These marks, rather than detracting from Hanuman's appearance, actually enhanced his distinctive features and served to identify him unmistakably throughout all his future adventures. The slightly altered shape of his jaw gave him a more formidable appearance that would prove advantageous during his career as a warrior and diplomat, while the small scars left by the thunderbolt's impact became symbols of his survival of divine punishment and his subsequent elevation to unprecedented status among the gods' favorites. As Hanuman began to recover from his injuries, displaying the rapid healing that characterized his divine constitution, the assembled gods recognized that they faced a new challenge. The child's attempt to swallow the sun had demonstrated power that, while currently unfocused and instinctive, could potentially threaten cosmic stability if left completely unchecked. The boons they had granted him in compensation for his injuries had only increased his already formidable abilities. The solution came from an unexpected source, a group of ancient sages who had observed the entire incident through their meditative practices. These wise beings, led by the venerable Angiras, approached the gods with a proposal that would address the legitimate concerns about Hanuman's power, while preserving his ability to serve righteousness when the cosmic need arose. The curse they proposed was actually a sophisticated form of divine protection, designed to contain Hanuman's abilities until circumstances required their full manifestation. The forgetfulness that would be placed upon him was not complete amnesia, but rather a selective suppression of awareness regarding the full extent of his powers. He would retain his basic abilities and his essential nature, but the more dramatic manifestations of his divine heritage would remain dormant until triggered by specific conditions. The conditions for the curse's removal were carefully crafted to ensure that Hanuman's powers would emerge precisely when they were most needed for the preservation of Dharma. The trigger would be the recognition of his abilities by others who served righteousness, particularly when such recognition occurred during moments of crisis, when conventional solutions had proven inadequate. This arrangement satisfied all parties involved. Vayu's anger was appeased by the generous boons granted to his son, and the assurance that the child's abilities would not be permanently diminished. The gods were reassured that Hanuman's power would not again threaten cosmic stability through innocent but dangerous actions. The sages were pleased that their solution preserved the child's potential for future service to righteousness, while protecting the universe from uncontrolled divine power. The implementation of the curse required delicate precision, to ensure that it would function exactly as intended. The sages wove their spell with threads of cosmic law that would respond only to the specific conditions they had established. Hanuman's memory of his divine abilities would fade gradually, like a dream upon waking, leaving him with only a vague sense that he possessed capabilities beyond those of ordinary Vanaras. As the divine child recovered fully from his injuries and the curse began to take effect, he retained his basic superhuman strength and agility, but lost conscious access to abilities like size changing, flight across vast distances, and the more spectacular manifestations of his divine heritage. His personality remained unchanged. He was still fearless, curious, and possessed of boundless energy, but his actions would no longer pose threats to cosmic stability. The gods departed with the satisfaction of having resolved a crisis that could have had catastrophic consequences, while also ensuring that Hanuman would be available to serve righteousness when the cosmic situation required intervention by one of his unique capabilities. Vayu resumed his normal functions, allowing air to flow freely throughout the universe once again, though he maintained a special protective watch over his son that would continue throughout all of Hanuman's future adventures. The years following Hanuman's dramatic encounter with Indra's thunderbolt brought a period of relative calm to the royal household in the Trikuta Mountains. As the divine curse gradually settled over his consciousness, like morning mist obscuring a landscape, Hanuman's memories of his most spectacular abilities faded into the realm of half-remembered dreams. Yet his fundamental nature remained unchanged. He possessed strength that far exceeded any ordinary Vanara, reflexes that bordered on supernatural, and an intellect that absorbed knowledge with remarkable speed. Kesari and Anjana recognized that their son's education required resources beyond what their mountain kingdom could provide. While Hanuman had mastered the basic combat techniques and survival skills expected of Vanara nobility, his hunger for knowledge seemed insatiable. He would spend hours questioning the court scholars about subjects ranging from military strategy to the movements of celestial bodies, often exhausting their expertise and leaving them struggling to provide adequate answers to his increasingly sophisticated inquiries. The solution to this educational challenge came from an unexpected source. Surya, the sun god, had observed Hanuman's development with particular interest ever since the child's attempted consumption of his celestial form. Rather than harboring resentment over the incident, Surya had developed a paternal fondness for the young Vanara, whose fearless approach to the impossible reminded him of the cosmic boldness required to maintain his daily journey across the heavens. Surya's offer to serve as Hanuman's guru represented an unprecedented opportunity. The sun god possessed knowledge that encompassed not merely the Vedas and traditional scriptures, but the practical wisdom gained through eons of witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations. His daily traverse of the sky provided him with intimate knowledge of every kingdom, every ruler, and every significant event that occurred within the three worlds. The arrangement they established was both practical and mutually beneficial. Each morning as Surya began his journey across the heavens, Hanuman would position himself in the air before the solar chariot, maintaining a precise distance that allowed him to receive instruction without interfering with the sun god's cosmic duties. This required Hanuman to develop extraordinary concentration and physical endurance, as he needed to match Surya's speed while simultaneously absorbing complex philosophical and practical teachings. The curriculum Surya designed for his unusual student was comprehensive beyond anything available in earthly institutions. They began with the foundational texts, the four Vedas with their intricate hymns, rituals, and philosophical insights. Hanuman's divine heritage allowed him to grasp concepts that typically required years of study, but Surya insisted on thorough understanding rather than mere memorization. Each verse was explored not only for its literal meaning, but for its deeper implications regarding cosmic law, social order, and individual duty. Grammar, which might seem mundane to ordinary students, became a fascinating exploration of the very structure of reality under Surya's guidance. The sun god explained how Sanskrit's precise construction reflected the mathematical principles underlying creation itself, how the arrangement of syllables in sacred mantras could influence the fundamental forces of nature, and how mastery of language provided the foundation for all other forms of knowledge. The study of scriptures expanded beyond the Vedas to encompass the Upanishads, those mystical texts that explored the nature of ultimate reality and the relationship between individual consciousness and universal truth. Hanuman's questions during these sessions often surprised even Surya with their depth and originality. The young Vanara would pose hypothetical scenarios that tested the practical application of philosophical principles, forcing both teacher and student to examine familiar concepts from entirely new perspectives. Military strategy formed another crucial component of Hanuman's education. Surya had witnessed countless battles throughout history, observing the tactics that led to victory and the mistakes that resulted in defeat. He shared with Hanuman the secrets of great commanders, the importance of understanding terrain and weather, the psychology of leadership, and the delicate balance between aggression and restraint that characterized truly effective military leaders. Diplomacy received equal attention in their curriculum. Surya emphasized that the greatest victories were often achieved without warfare, through skillful negotiation, strategic alliances, and the careful management of competing interests. He taught Hanuman to read the subtle signs that revealed a person's true intentions, to craft words that could persuade without deceiving, and to understand the complex web of relationships that connected kingdoms and influenced political decisions. The logistics of this aerial classroom required Hanuman to develop abilities that pushed the boundaries of what remained accessible to him, despite the divine curse. While he could no longer consciously access his power to grow to enormous size, or leap across vast distances in a single bound, he retained sufficient strength and agility to keep pace with Surya's chariot throughout the god's daily journey. This daily exercise gradually enhanced his physical capabilities, building endurance and coordination that would prove invaluable in future adventures. Their relationship evolved beyond that of simple teacher and student, into something resembling the bond between a master craftsman and his most promising apprentice. Surya began to share stories from his extensive experience that went beyond formal instruction, recounting the personalities of great rulers, the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, and the subtle patterns that governed the ebb and flow of historical events. Hanuman's progress exceeded even Surya's optimistic expectations. Within a few years, the young Vanara had mastered not only the traditional curriculum, but had begun to synthesize different fields of knowledge in ways that demonstrated genuine wisdom rather than mere scholarship. He could analyze a military situation using principles derived from philosophical texts, or resolve diplomatic challenges by applying insights gained from studying ancient poetry. The completion of Hanuman's formal education with Surya coincided with significant changes in the political landscape of the Vanara territories. The kingdom of Kishkindha, the most powerful of the Vanara realms, had become the center of a succession dispute that would ultimately reshape the balance of power throughout the region. King Riksharaja, the aging ruler of Kishkindha, had two sons whose contrasting personalities and abilities had created a natural rivalry that extended far beyond typical sibling competition. Vali, the elder prince, possessed physical strength that exceeded even the impressive standards typical of Vanara royalty. His prowess in combat was legendary throughout the Vanara territories, and his victories over demons, wild beasts, and rival warriors had earned him a reputation that inspired both admiration and fear. Vali's approach to leadership emphasized direct action, overwhelming force, and the establishment of clear hierarchies based on demonstrated strength. His supporters admired his decisiveness and his willingness to confront challenges head-on, viewing these qualities as essential for maintaining the kingdom's security in a dangerous world. Sugriva, the younger prince, compensated for his lesser physical strength through intelligence, charisma, and a natural talent for building alliances. Where Vali would solve problems through confrontation, Sugriva preferred negotiation and strategic maneuvering. His supporters appreciated his more inclusive approach to governance and his willingness to consider multiple perspectives before making important decisions. The brothers' relationship had been complicated by a prophecy delivered during their youth by a wandering sage. The seer had predicted that both brothers would rule Kishkindha, but that their reigns would be separated by a period of exile and conflict that would ultimately strengthen the kingdom. This ambiguous prediction had influenced their interactions throughout their lives, creating an underlying tension that affected their ability to work together effectively. Hanuman's introduction to the princes of Kishkindha occurred during a diplomatic visit his parents made to the royal court. Kesari's reputation as a just and capable ruler had earned him invitations to participate in the councils where important inter-kingdom matters were discussed. Anjana's presence was requested due to her unique perspective as a former celestial being, whose insights often proved valuable when dealing with supernatural threats or opportunities. The young Hanuman, now approaching adolescence, and bearing the refined bearing that resulted from his intensive education under Surya's guidance, immediately attracted attention at the Kishkindha court. His combination of physical prowess, intellectual sophistication, and natural charisma set him apart from other young Vanaras of noble birth. His responses to questions from the court scholars demonstrated knowledge that impressed even the most learned advisors, while his performance in martial exercises revealed skills that rivaled those of warriors with decades of experience. Sugriva, who was closer to Hanuman's age and shared his interest in scholarly pursuits, found himself drawn to the young visitor. Their initial conversations revealed remarkable compatibility in their approaches to complex problems, and their shared belief that effective leadership required both strength and wisdom. Sugriva's natural diplomatic skills complemented Hanuman's more direct analytical approach, creating a partnership that proved beneficial to both. Their friendship deepened during the extended visit as they explored the vast territories surrounding Kishkindha together. The kingdom's landscape provided diverse challenges that tested different aspects of their abilities. Dense forests where navigation required both physical skill and mental acuity, mountain ranges that demanded endurance and careful planning, and river systems that could only be crossed through teamwork and strategic thinking. During these adventures, Hanuman's suppressed abilities occasionally manifested in subtle ways that neither he nor his companions fully understood. He would instinctively choose routes that avoided dangerous terrain, demonstrate stamina that exceeded normal expectations, or display combat reflexes that seemed to anticipate his opponent's actions. These manifestations were not dramatic enough to break through the divine curse that obscured his true capabilities, but they contributed to his growing reputation as an exceptional individual, even by Vanara standards. The crisis that would fundamentally alter the relationship between the royal brothers began with the appearance of a demon named Mayavi, whose challenge to the kingdom of Kishkindha could not be ignored. Mayavi belonged to a category of asuras, whose power derived from their ability to manipulate darkness and create illusions that confused their enemies' senses. His arrival at the kingdom's borders was accompanied by demands that King Raksharaja surrender a significant portion of his territory or face single combat against a champion of Mayavi's choosing. The demon's timing was strategically calculated to exploit the existing tensions within the royal family by challenging the kingdom when the succession question remained unresolved. Mayavi hoped to provoke internal conflict that would weaken Kishkindha, regardless of the immediate outcome of his challenge. His reputation for cunning was well established among the Asura clans, and his previous victories had been achieved as much through psychological warfare as physical combat. Vali's response to Mayavi's challenge was characteristically direct and uncompromising. As the elder prince and heir apparent, he claimed the right to serve as Kishkindha's champion, confident that his superior strength would prove decisive in any confrontation. His supporters within the court endorsed this decision, arguing that the kingdom's reputation required a demonstration of overwhelming force that would discourage future challenges from other potential enemies. Sugriva's concerns about his brother's plan focused not on Vali's ability to defeat Mayavi in direct combat, but on the demon's known preference for trickery and misdirection. He argued for a more cautious approach that would involve gathering intelligence about Mayavi's specific abilities and developing tactics designed to counter the demon's illusory powers. His supporters worried that Vali's straightforward fighting style might prove ineffective against an opponent who specialized in deception. The debate within the royal council reflected broader philosophical differences about how Kishkindha should respond to external threats. Vali's faction believed that decisive action and overwhelming displays of strength were the most effective deterrents to future aggression, while Sugriva's supporters argued for more nuanced approaches that took into account the specific nature of each challenge. Hanuman found himself in a unique position during these discussions. His friendship with Sugriva naturally inclined him to support the younger prince's more strategic approach, but his education under Surya had taught him to analyze situations objectively rather than allowing personal relationships to cloud his judgment. His contributions to the planning sessions demonstrated the synthesis of theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom that characterized his educational background. The compromise that eventually emerged from the council deliberations reflected input from both factions. Vali would indeed serve as Kishkindha's champion, but the confrontation would take place under conditions designed to minimize Mayavi's advantages. The battle site would be carefully chosen to provide good visibility and multiple escape routes. Additional warriors would be positioned nearby to provide assistance if needed, and specific signals would be established to coordinate responses to unexpected developments. Mayavi's acceptance of these conditions surprised many observers, as demons typically preferred to fight under circumstances that maximized their natural advantages. His willingness to engage in what appeared to be a relatively straightforward combat suggested either supreme confidence in his abilities or the existence of a hidden strategy that had not yet become apparent to the Vanara leadership. The battle began at dawn in a clearing that had been selected for its strategic advantages to the Vanara forces. Vali's initial assault demonstrated the overwhelming physical superiority that had made him legendary throughout the region. His blows landed with devastating force, and his speed allowed him to maintain constant pressure on his opponent. For the first phase of the combat, it appeared that the confrontation would end quickly with a decisive Vanara victory. Mayavi's response revealed the cunning that had made him such a formidable opponent. Rather than attempting to match Vali's physical prowess, the demon began to employ his mastery of illusion to create multiple false images of himself. These duplicates moved independently and appeared to attack from different directions simultaneously, forcing Vali to divide his attention and reducing the effectiveness of his superior strength. As the battle progressed, Mayavi's illusions became increasingly sophisticated. The demon created false versions of the terrain that made Vali stumble and lose his footing. generated phantom sounds that suggested attacks from unexpected directions, and manipulated light and shadow to obscure his true location. The straightforward combat that Vali had expected transformed into a complex puzzle that required different skills than those he had spent his life developing. The turning point came when Mayavi appeared to retreat into a cave system that honeycombed the hills surrounding the battle site. Vali's pursuit was motivated by his determination to complete his victory, and his concern that allowing the demon to escape would be interpreted as failure. His decision to follow Mayavi into the underground passages was tactically questionable, as it surrendered the advantages of open terrain and good visibility that had favored the Vanara forces. Sugriva's decision to follow his brother into the cave system was driven by genuine concern for Vali's safety, rather than any desire to claim glory for himself. He recognized that the underground environment would amplify Mayavi's advantages while negating many of Vali's strengths, and he hoped that his presence might provide tactical support that would prove decisive. His entry into the caves was accompanied by several trusted warriors, including Hanuman, whose combination of strength and intelligence made him valuable in unpredictable situations. The cave system proved to be far more extensive and complex than anyone had anticipated. The passages branched and interconnected in patterns that defied easy navigation, and the darkness was so complete that even Vanara eyes, adapted for excellent night vision, struggled to distinguish details beyond arm's length. The acoustic properties of the tunnels created echoes and distortions that made it impossible to track movement or determine direction with confidence. The sounds that emerged from the depths of the cave system sent chills through the waiting Vanara forces positioned outside. What began as the clash of combat, the ring of weapons, shouts of exertion, and the thunderous impacts of powerful blows, gradually transformed into something far more ominous. The echoes that reverberated from the underground passages carried undertones of supernatural conflict, with strange harmonics that suggested forces beyond normal physical combat were at work within the darkness. Hours passed without any sign of the brothers' return, and the acoustic disturbances from within the caves grew increasingly violent and chaotic. The Vanara warriors stationed at the entrance could hear what sounded like massive stones being shattered, the groaning of structural supports under tremendous stress, and occasionally roars of pain or rage that seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. The complexity of the sounds made it impossible to determine whether the voices belonged to Vali, Sugriva, Mayavi, or some combination of all three. As the day wore on, the noises from the cave system began to change character once again. The violent crashes and battle cries gradually diminished, replaced by more subtle sounds that were somehow even more disturbing, scraping noises that suggested movement through narrow passages, occasional splashes that indicated the presence of underground water, and long periods of complete silence that were broken only by distant, unidentifiable sounds that could have been footsteps, falling rocks, or something else entirely. The Vanara forces faced an impossible decision. Military protocol demanded that they maintain their positions and await orders from their commanders, but the extended silence from within the caves suggested that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The senior officers present lacked the authority to make decisions about such an unprecedented situation, and the political implications of any action they might take could have far-reaching consequences for the kingdom's stability. Near sunset, when the shadows were lengthening, and the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky, a single figure emerged from the cave system. Vali appeared at the entrance, his powerful frame silhouetted against the fading light, but his condition immediately alarmed the waiting warriors. His clothing was torn and stained with what appeared to be blood. His breathing was labored despite his legendary endurance, and his movements suggested exhaustion that bordered on collapse. The prince's report to his assembled forces was brief and delivered in a voice that carried undertones of trauma that had nothing to do with physical injury. He explained that the battle with Mayavi had been more difficult than anticipated, requiring him to pursue the demon through multiple chambers and passages before finally cornering and destroying the creature. The combat had been so intense and the cave system so unstable that several passages had collapsed during the fighting, sealing off the routes through which Sugriva and his companions had been attempting to provide support. Vali's assertion that his brother and the accompanying warriors had perished in the cave-ins was delivered with apparent grief, but the senior officers noted subtle inconsistencies in his account that raised troubling questions. The prince's description of the underground battle contained details that seemed inconsistent with the sounds that had been heard from outside, and his explanation for the timing of various events did not align perfectly with the acoustic evidence that had been available to the waiting forces. More disturbing were the physical evidence that contradicted parts of Vali's story. The blood on his clothing appeared fresh, despite his claim that the combat had ended hours earlier, and some of the stains seemed to have patterns that suggested they had come from sources other than the demon he claimed to have defeated. His weapon showed signs of recent use, but the damage patterns were not consistent with combat against the type of opponent Mayavi was known to be. The political implications of accepting Vali's account without question were enormous. If Sugriva had indeed perished in the cave system, Vali's position as heir to the throne of Kishkindha would be uncontested, eliminating the succession dispute that had been a source of ongoing tension within the kingdom. However, if there were any possibility that Sugriva had survived and Vali was concealing the truth for political advantage, the consequences for the kingdom's stability could be catastrophic. The senior Vanara officers found themselves in an impossible position. They lacked the authority to challenge a royal prince's official account of events, but they also had responsibilities to the kingdom that prevented them from simply accepting potentially false information that could affect the succession. Their solution was to conduct a thorough but respectful investigation that would either confirm Vali's story or reveal evidence that demanded further inquiry. The search of the accessible portions of the cave system began immediately, with teams of experienced warriors and scouts working by torchlight to map the underground passages and locate any evidence of the reported battle. What they discovered raised more questions than it answered. While there was indeed evidence of recent combat, broken weapons, disturbed earth, and areas where the rock walls showed signs of tremendous impacts, the patterns did not entirely match Vali's description of events. Most significantly, the searchers found no bodies, either of Mayavi or of the Vanara warriors who had supposedly perished in the cave-ins. The collapsed passages that Vali had described were indeed present, but examination by engineers familiar with underground construction suggested that the collapses had been deliberately triggered rather than resulting from the incidental damage of combat. The positioning of the fallen stones and the patterns of debris indicated careful placement of force rather than random destruction. The investigation teams also discovered evidence of multiple exit routes from the cave system that had not been mentioned in Vali's report. Several passages led to openings in distant hills, and some showed signs of recent use that suggested individuals had passed through them within the previous few days. The implications of these discoveries were troubling, as they indicated that escape from the underground system had been possible even after the reported collapses had occurred. Despite these inconsistencies, the political realities of the situation prevented any direct challenge to Vali's account. The prince's supporters within the court argued that the investigation had confirmed the essential elements of his story: evidence of combat, blocked passages, and the absence of survivors other than Vali himself. They maintained that the minor discrepancies in details could be explained by the confusion and trauma of underground battle, and that questioning the word of a royal prince without definitive proof of deception would set dangerous precedents for the kingdom's governance. The formal conclusion of the investigation established Vali's version of events as the official record, clearing the way for his uncontested succession to the throne of Kishkindha. King Riksharaja, aged and worn down by the stress of the succession dispute, abdicated in favor of his surviving son within days of receiving the investigation's report. The coronation ceremony was conducted with appropriate solemnity, but many observers noted that the celebrations lacked the enthusiasm that typically accompanied such momentous occasions. Hanuman's position during these events was particularly difficult. His friendship with Sugriva and his presence during the cave expedition gave him insights that others lacked, but his status as a visiting prince from a smaller kingdom limited his ability to influence the proceedings. His own observations of the evidence found in the cave system had led him to conclusions that differed significantly from the official findings, but diplomatic protocol prevented him from voicing these concerns publicly. The young Vanara's analytical mind, sharpened by years of education under Surya's guidance, had identified patterns in the physical evidence that suggested a far more complex sequence of events than Vali's straightforward account indicated. The positioning of weapons, the distribution of bloodstains, and the nature of the structural damage all pointed towards scenarios that involved deliberate deception rather than the tragic accident that had been officially accepted. More troubling to Hanuman was his assessment of Vali's behavior during and after the investigation. The new king's responses to questions had been technically accurate but had avoided addressing the most significant inconsistencies in the evidence. His emotional reactions had seemed calculated rather than spontaneous, and his political maneuvering in the aftermath of the incident had been remarkably sophisticated for someone who was supposedly grieving the loss of his brother. The months following Vali's coronation brought significant changes to the kingdom of Kishkindha that reflected the new king's approach to governance. Vali's administration emphasized military strength and territorial expansion, launching campaigns against neighboring kingdoms that had previously maintained peaceful relationships with Kishkindha. His court attracted warriors and advisors who shared his preference for direct action over diplomatic negotiation, gradually displacing the more moderate voices that had influenced policy during his father's reign. These policy changes had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond Kishkindha's borders. The Vanara territories had traditionally maintained a delicate balance of power that prevented any single kingdom from dominating the others, but Vali's aggressive expansion threatened to upset this equilibrium. Smaller kingdoms found themselves forced to choose between submission to Kishkindha's growing influence or alliance with other powers that might provide protection against Vali's ambitions. The transformation of Kishkindha's political culture also affected the kingdom's internal dynamics. Vali's preference for loyalty over competence in selecting advisors created a court environment where honest counsel became increasingly rare. Ministers who had once spoken freely about matters of state now measured their words carefully, aware that disagreement with the king's views could be interpreted as disloyalty. This gradual silencing of dissenting voices removed an important check on royal authority, allowing Vali's decisions to go unchallenged even when they might not serve the kingdom's best interests. The economic policies of Kishkindha also reflected Vali's changing priorities. Resources that had once been distributed according to need and merit were now allocated based on political considerations. Regions whose leaders demonstrated unwavering loyalty to Vali received preferential treatment in times of scarcity, while areas associated with Sugriva's supporters found themselves disadvantaged. This politicization of resource distribution created resentments that would simmer beneath the surface of Kishkindha's apparent prosperity. Sugriva watched these developments with growing alarm, recognizing that each passing day made his position more precarious. The brother he had once admired and followed without question had become someone he barely recognized. The warmth that had characterized their relationship had been replaced by a cold formality that made every interaction feel like a diplomatic negotiation rather than a family conversation. Sugriva found himself weighing his words carefully, aware that even innocent remarks could be twisted into evidence of disloyalty. The Vanara prince's closest companions urged him to take action, to challenge Vali's increasingly autocratic rule before it was too late. But Sugriva hesitated, still hoping that the brother he remembered might somehow return. He clung to memories of their childhood, when they had faced every challenge together, when the idea of conflict between them would have seemed impossible. This hope, though increasingly unrealistic, prevented Sugriva from taking the decisive action that might have changed the course of events. Meanwhile, in the distant forests where Hanuman continued his education and service, whispers of Kishkindha's troubles began to reach his ears. Travelers spoke of a kingdom divided, of a king whose strength had become a source of fear rather than security, of a prince living in the shadow of suspicion. These reports troubled Hanuman deeply, for he sensed that the conflicts brewing in Kishkindha would eventually demand his involvement. The young Vanara's understanding of his own destiny remained incomplete, the curse that had sealed his memories of divine power still firmly in place. Yet something within him stirred when he heard of Sugriva's plight, a sense of connection that transcended ordinary friendship. Hanuman did not yet understand that his fate and Sugriva's were intertwined, that the bonds forged in Kishkindha's political crucible would eventually lead him to his greatest purpose. The seasons turned in their eternal cycle, and with each passing year, the tensions within Kishkindha grew more pronounced. Vali's rule, once celebrated for its strength and justice, had gradually transformed into something darker. The king who had protected his people from external threats now seemed more concerned with protecting his throne from imagined internal enemies. His suspicion of Sugriva had metastasized into a general paranoia that affected every aspect of governance. The court of Kishkindha became a place of whispered conversations and careful alliances. Nobles who had once competed to demonstrate their valor now competed to demonstrate their loyalty, understanding that Vali's favor was the only currency that mattered. This transformation created a culture of sycophancy that isolated the king from honest feedback, surrounding him with voices that told him only what he wanted to hear. Sugriva's position grew increasingly untenable. Every action he took was scrutinized for signs of ambition or treachery. When he succeeded in any endeavor, it was viewed as an attempt to overshadow his brother. When he failed, it was seen as evidence of incompetence that disqualified him from any role in governance. This impossible situation left Sugriva feeling trapped, unable to prove his loyalty no matter what he did. The Vanara prince found solace in a small circle of trusted friends who remained loyal despite the risks. Among these was Hanuman, whose visits to Kishkindha had become less frequent but more meaningful. The young Vanara's presence seemed to calm Sugriva's troubled spirit, offering a reminder that not everyone measured worth by political calculation. Their conversations ranged across many topics, but always returned to questions of duty, loyalty, and the proper exercise of power. Hanuman listened more than he spoke during these discussions, absorbing Sugriva's perspectives while offering his own insights when appropriate. The curse that limited his awareness of his own powers did not affect his wisdom or his ability to perceive the deeper currents flowing beneath surface events. He sensed that Sugriva's trials were preparing him for something important, though the nature of that preparation remained unclear. The friendship between Hanuman and Sugriva deepened through these difficult years, forged in the fires of adversity. Sugriva came to rely on Hanuman's steady presence and clear thinking, finding in the younger Vanara a loyalty that asked nothing in return. This relationship would prove crucial in the events to come, providing a foundation of trust that would support both Vanaras through challenges neither could yet imagine. As Kishkindha's internal conflicts intensified, external threats began to gather on the horizon. Reports reached the kingdom of a powerful demon king in the distant south, a Rakshasa named Ravana, whose ambitions extended across the entire world. This Ravana had conquered the golden city of Lanka and was building an empire that threatened to engulf all the kingdoms of the earth. His armies were vast, his powers seemingly unlimited, and his cruelty legendary. Vali received these reports with the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat. He dismissed concerns about Ravana's growing power, believing that Kishkindha's strength was sufficient to deter any aggressor. This confidence, while not entirely unfounded given Vali's personal prowess, failed to account for the internal weaknesses that his own policies had created. A kingdom divided against itself, no matter how powerful its king, could not hope to stand against a unified external threat. The cosmic forces that governed the universe watched these developments with interest, understanding that the conflicts brewing in Kishkindha were part of a larger pattern. The same divine plan that had brought Hanuman into the world was now arranging the circumstances that would eventually call forth his hidden powers. Every political intrigue, every personal betrayal, every moment of suffering was a thread in a tapestry whose full design remained hidden from mortal eyes. Hanuman continued his life of service and learning, unaware of the role he was destined to play in the great events approaching. His days were filled with the ordinary tasks of existence, yet each experience added to the reservoir of wisdom and strength that would eventually be needed. The curse that limited his awareness served a purpose, preventing him from acting prematurely and ensuring that his powers would emerge at precisely the right moment. The relationship between Hanuman and his mother Anjana remained a source of strength and guidance. Though physical distance often separated them, the bond between mother and son transcended ordinary limitations. Anjana's prayers for her son's welfare rose daily to the heavens, joining the cosmic currents that shape destiny. She sensed that Hanuman's true purpose had not yet been revealed, that the extraordinary child she had raised was destined for achievements beyond her ability to imagine. The crisis that would finally shatter the fragile peace of Kishkindha arrived without warning, emerging from the very qualities that had made Vali a great warrior. A powerful demon named Mayavi, seeking to prove his strength against the mightiest champions of the world, came to Kishkindha's gates and issued a challenge that Vali could not ignore. The demon's taunts echoed through the night, questioning Vali's courage and mocking his reputation. Vali's response was immediate and predictable. The Vanara king, whose pride could not tolerate any challenge to his supremacy, rushed out to confront Mayavi without pausing to consider strategy or consequences. Sugriva, despite the tensions between them, followed his brother, unwilling to let Vali face danger alone. Whatever conflicts divided them, the bonds of blood and shared history still held some power. The battle that followed was fierce beyond description. Mayavi, realizing that he could not defeat Vali in direct combat, fled into a vast cave system that honeycombed the mountains near Kishkindha. Vali pursued without hesitation, his battle rage overwhelming any caution. At the cave's entrance, he turned to Sugriva with instructions that would prove fateful. "Wait here, guard the entrance, and if I do not return within a fortnight, assume I have fallen and seal the cave to prevent the demon's escape." Sugriva waited at the cave's mouth, as days stretched into weeks. The sounds of combat echoed from the depths, terrible noises that spoke of a battle beyond mortal comprehension. Then, after many days, blood began to flow from the cave's entrance, a crimson stream that seemed to confirm Sugriva's worst fears. The sounds of fighting ceased, replaced by an ominous silence that suggested only one possible conclusion. Faced with what appeared to be evidence of his brother's death, Sugriva made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Following Vali's own instructions, he sealed the cave entrance with a massive boulder, trapping whatever remained inside. Then, with a heavy heart, he returned to Kishkindha to deliver the terrible news. The kingdom mourned its fallen king, and after appropriate ceremonies, Sugriva was crowned as Vali's successor. But Vali was not dead. The blood that had flowed from the cave belonged to Mayavi, whom Vali had finally defeated after a prolonged struggle. When the victorious king attempted to exit the cave, he found his path blocked by the very boulder his brother had placed. The realization of what had happened filled Vali with a rage that eclipsed anything he had felt before. In his mind, there was only one explanation. Sugriva had deliberately sealed him in, attempting to murder his own brother to seize the throne. With strength born of fury, Vali shattered the boulder and emerged from the cave like a force of nature. His return to Kishkindha was not the joyful homecoming of a hero, but the terrible arrival of an avenger. He found Sugriva seated on the throne that Vali considered rightfully his, wearing the crown of Kishkindha, receiving the homage of subjects who had apparently forgotten their true king with suspicious speed. The confrontation between the brothers was volcanic in its intensity. Vali's accusations poured forth like lava, burning away any possibility of reconciliation. He refused to hear Sugriva's explanations, dismissed his protests of innocence, and rejected any interpretation of events that did not confirm his belief in betrayal. The paranoid suspicions that had festered for years now seemed completely justified, and Vali's rage knew no bounds. Sugriva tried desperately to explain, to describe the blood flowing from the cave, the silence that had followed the sounds of battle, the impossible choice he had faced. But Vali heard only excuses, only the desperate lies of a traitor caught in his treachery. The brother who had once been his closest companion was now his mortal enemy, and Vali's response was swift and merciless. The battle between the brothers was brief but decisive. Vali's superior strength, enhanced by divine boons that Sugriva did not possess, made the outcome inevitable. Sugriva was beaten, humiliated, and driven from Kishkindha with nothing but his life. Vali's final curse followed him into exile. Never return, on pain of death, and know that everything you once had is now forfeit. Sugriva fled into the wilderness, accompanied only by a handful of loyal followers who chose exile over submission to Vali's increasingly tyrannical rule. Among those who would eventually join him was Hanuman, whose loyalty to Sugriva had never wavered despite the political pressures that had made such loyalty dangerous. The young Vanara's choice to follow Sugriva into exile was made without hesitation, guided by an instinct that transcended rational calculation. The exiles found refuge on Rishyamukha mountain, a place protected by a curse that prevented Vali from entering. Here Sugriva established a court in exile, gathering around him those Vanaras who could not accept Vali's rule. The community was small and poor compared to the splendor of Kishkindha, but it was united by bonds of loyalty and shared suffering that gave it a strength beyond its numbers. Life on Rishyamukha mountain was harsh but not without its compensations. The exiles learned to survive with limited resources, developing skills and resilience that the comfortable life of Kishkindha had never required. Sugriva, stripped of royal privilege, discovered qualities within himself that prosperity had obscured. The prince who had once been uncertain of his own worth began to develop into a leader capable of inspiring genuine loyalty. Hanuman's role in the exile community grew increasingly important. His wisdom, his calm presence, and his unwavering support made him Sugriva's most trusted advisor. The curse that limited his awareness of his own powers did not prevent him from offering counsel that proved valuable in navigating the challenges of exile. His insights into character and motivation helped Sugriva understand which potential allies could be trusted and which should be avoided. The years of exile were also years of preparation. though none of the Vanaras fully understood what they were being prepared for. The hardships they endured built strength and character that would prove essential in the trials to come. The bonds forged in adversity created a unity that no amount of prosperity could have achieved. The small community on Rishyamukha mountain was being shaped into an instrument of destiny. Sugriva's thoughts often turned to his lost kingdom and his estranged brother. Despite everything that had happened, he could not entirely extinguish the love he had once felt for Vali. The memories of their childhood, of the bond they had shared before suspicion and misunderstanding had poisoned everything, remained painful reminders of what had been lost. Sugriva sometimes wondered if reconciliation might still be possible, if some combination of words and circumstances might restore what had been broken. Hanuman listened to these reflections with compassion but also with clarity. He understood that Sugriva's hope for reconciliation, while emotionally understandable, was not realistic given Vali's nature. The elder brother's conviction of betrayal had hardened into an unshakable certainty that no evidence or argument could penetrate. Any attempt at reconciliation would be interpreted as weakness or treachery, providing Vali with justification for the violence he was already inclined to commit. The political situation in Kishkindha continued to deteriorate under Vali's increasingly erratic rule. The king's paranoia, validated in his own mind by Sugriva's apparent betrayal, now extended to everyone around him. Ministers who had served faithfully for years found themselves accused of disloyalty based on the slightest pretexts. The court became a place of fear where no one felt safe, where today's favorite could become tomorrow's exile, or worse. Reports of these developments reached Rishyamukha mountain through various channels, painting a picture of a kingdom in decline. Vali's strength remained undiminished, but his wisdom had been consumed by suspicion and rage. The qualities that had once made him a great king had been corrupted into instruments of oppression. Kishkindha's subjects lived in fear of their protector, a tragic inversion of the proper relationship between ruler and ruled. The cosmic forces continued their patient work, arranging circumstances according to a plan that remained hidden from mortal understanding. In the distant kingdom of Ayodhya, events were unfolding that would eventually intersect with the fate of Kishkindha's exiles. A prince named Rama, an avatar of Lord Vishnu himself, was about to begin a journey that would change the course of history. His path would lead him through the forests where Sugriva waited, bringing together destinies that had been separated by vast distances of space and circumstance. Hanuman sensed something stirring in the fabric of reality, a shift in the cosmic currents that suggested significant changes approaching. The curse that limited his awareness prevented him from understanding the full significance of these sensations, but he knew enough to recognize that the long years of waiting were drawing to a close. Something was coming, something that would transform everything and everyone it touched. The Vanara's dreams during this period became increasingly vivid and strange. He saw images of a great bridge spanning an impossible ocean, of armies clashing beneath foreign skies, of a golden city burning with divine fire. These visions made no sense to his waking mind, yet they carried an emotional weight that suggested profound importance. Hanuman shared these dreams with no one, uncertain of their meaning and unwilling to raise hopes or fears based on such uncertain foundations. The day that would change everything began like any other on Rishyamukha mountain. The exiles went about their daily routines, unaware that destiny was about to arrive in their midst. Hanuman was engaged in his usual duties when he noticed two figures approaching through the forest below. Something about these strangers immediately captured his attention, a quality that set them apart from ordinary travelers. The two men were clearly warriors, their bearing and movements speaking of extensive martial training. They carried bows of exceptional craftsmanship and moved through the forest with a combination of alertness and grace that suggested both danger and nobility. But it was something beyond their physical appearance that drew Hanuman's interest. a radiance that seemed to emanate from the taller of the two figures, a light that ordinary eyes might miss, but that Hanuman's deeper perception could not ignore. Sugriva, observing the strangers from a distance, felt a mixture of hope and fear. Could these be allies sent by fate to aid his cause? Or were they agents of Vali, sent to locate and destroy the exile community? The uncertainty was paralyzing, and Sugriva found himself unable to decide how to respond to this unexpected development. It was Hanuman who proposed a solution. He would approach the strangers in disguise, presenting himself as a wandering ascetic, and determine their intentions through conversation. If they proved to be enemies, he would lead them away from Rishamukha mountain. If they were potential allies, he would reveal himself and arrange a meeting with Sugriva. This plan, combining caution with initiative, was typical of Hanuman's approach to challenges. Sugriva agreed, and Hanuman descended the mountain to intercept the strangers. As he approached them, something extraordinary began to happen within him. The curse that had sealed his memories and limited his awareness began to weaken, not breaking entirely, but loosening enough to allow glimpses of his true nature to surface. The radiance emanating from the taller stranger seemed to resonate with something deep within Hanuman, awakening powers and memories that had long been dormant. The meeting between Hanuman and the two princes was a moment of cosmic significance, though its full importance would only become clear in retrospect. Hanuman, maintaining his disguise as an ascetic, engaged the strangers in conversation, asking about their identities and purposes. The responses he received confirmed what his deeper instincts had already suggested. These were no ordinary travelers. The taller stranger introduced himself as Rama, Prince of Ayodhya, currently in exile due to complex circumstances involving palace intrigues and promises that could not be broken. His companion was Lakshmana, his devoted brother, who had chosen to share Rama's exile rather than remain in comfort while his beloved sibling suffered. They were searching for Rama's wife, Sita, who had been abducted by the demon king Ravana and carried away to his fortress in Lanka. As Rama spoke, Hanuman felt the curse that bound him continuing to weaken. The prince's words carried a power that transcended ordinary speech, resonating with truths that Hanuman's conscious mind had forgotten, but his deeper self still remembered. This was no mere mortal standing before him, but something far greater, a divine presence, clothed in human form for purposes that served the cosmic order. Hanuman's disguise fell away, not through any conscious decision but through the overwhelming force of recognition. He revealed his true identity and his connection to Sugriva, explaining the exile community's situation and offering to arrange a meeting between the Vanara prince and the noble strangers. Rama's response was gracious and interested, suggesting that an alliance between their causes might benefit everyone involved. The meeting between Rama and Sugriva that followed was the beginning of a partnership that would reshape the world. The two exiled princes, each wronged by circumstances beyond their control, found in each other the ally they had been seeking. Sugriva offered the resources of his community to aid in the search for Sita. Rama offered his strength and divine favor to help Sugriva reclaim his kingdom from Vali. Hanuman observed these negotiations with a growing sense of purpose. The vague stirrings he had felt, the strange dreams, the inexplicable certainties, all began to coalesce into a clearer understanding of his role. He was meant to serve Rama, to dedicate his considerable abilities to the cause of righteousness that the prince embodied. This realization brought a peace and clarity that Hanuman had never before experienced. The alliance between Rama and Sugriva was sealed with solemn oaths that bound both parties to mutual support. Rama agreed to help Sugriva defeat Vali and reclaim the throne of Kishkindha. In return, Sugriva pledged the full resources of the Vanara kingdom to the search for Sita and the eventual confrontation with Ravana. These promises, made in the presence of sacred fire and witnessed by the assembled Vanaras, created obligations that neither party would violate. The plan to deal with Vali required careful consideration. The Vanara king's strength was legendary, enhanced by a divine boon that transferred half the power of any opponent who faced him in single combat. This boon made direct confrontation extremely dangerous, as even the mightiest warrior would find himself weakened while Vali grew stronger. Some alternative approach was necessary. Rama proposed a solution that troubled some of those present. He would conceal himself while Sugriva challenged Vali to combat. When the brothers engaged, Rama would strike Vali with an arrow from hiding, using the element of surprise to overcome the protection of the divine boon. This plan, while practical, raised questions about honor and the proper conduct of warriors. Sugriva accepted the plan without hesitation, his years of suffering having eroded any scruples about the methods used to end them. Hanuman, however, felt conflicted. His growing devotion to Rama made him reluctant to question the prince's decisions, yet something about the proposed approach troubled his sense of righteousness. He kept these doubts to himself, trusting that Rama's divine nature ensured the ultimate justice of his actions. The confrontation with Vali unfolded according to plan, though not without complications. Sugriva's initial challenge brought Vali rushing from Kishkindha, eager to finally destroy the brother he considered a traitor. The battle between them was fierce, and for a moment it seemed that Sugriva might prevail through sheer determination. But Vali's superior strength eventually asserted itself, and Sugriva was forced to flee back to Rishyamukha mountain. Rama explained that he had been unable to distinguish between the brothers during the combat, their similar appearance making it impossible to strike without risking harm to Sugriva. A solution was devised. Sugriva would wear a distinctive garland that would identify him clearly, allowing Rama to target Vali without confusion. The second confrontation proceeded differently. When Vali emerged to answer Sugriva's renewed challenge, Rama was ready. As the brothers clashed, an arrow flew from concealment, striking Vali with fatal precision. The mighty Vanara king fell, his life ebbing away from a wound he had never seen coming. Vali's final moments were filled with accusations and questions. He demanded to know why Rama, a prince renowned for righteousness, had struck him from hiding like a common hunter. He pointed out that he had never wronged Rama, had never even met him before this fatal encounter. What justice was there in such a death? Rama's response addressed these challenges with arguments drawn from Dharma and cosmic law. Vali had wronged his brother, had stolen Sugriva's wife, had ruled through fear rather than justice. As a king committed to righteousness, Rama had the authority and obligation to punish such transgressions. The method of execution was justified by Vali's divine boon, which made conventional combat impossible. Whether these arguments fully satisfied Vali's objections remained unclear, but the dying king eventually accepted his fate. In his final moments, he reconciled with Sugriva, acknowledging that his own suspicions and actions had contributed to the tragedy. He entrusted his son Angada to Sugriva's care, and asked that the young prince be treated with the love and respect due to family. Then Vali died, his tremendous strength finally exhausted. The aftermath of Vali's death transformed the political landscape of Kishkindha. Sugriva was restored to the throne, this time with unquestioned legitimacy. The Vanara kingdom, reunited under a single ruler, began the process of healing from the divisions that had weakened it. Angada, despite his father's fate, was welcomed into Sugriva's court and given a position of honor that acknowledged his royal blood. Hanuman watched these developments with mixed emotions. The justice of Vali's death remained a question he could not fully resolve, yet he trusted that Rama's actions served purposes beyond mortal understanding. His devotion to the prince continued to deepen, fed by every interaction and observation. Whatever doubts he might harbor about specific decisions, his faith in Rama's ultimate righteousness remained unshaken. With Kishkindha secured and Sugriva established on the throne, attention turned to fulfilling the other half of the alliance, the search for Sita. Sugriva mobilized the full resources of his kingdom, dispatching search parties in every direction. Thousands of Vanaras spread across the land, seeking any trace of the abducted queen or information about Ravana's movements. Hanuman was assigned to lead the southern search party, a group that included some of the most capable Vanaras in Kishkindha. Among his companions were Angada, Vali's son, whose inclusion served both practical and political purposes. The young prince's presence demonstrated Sugriva's commitment to reconciliation, while his considerable abilities made him a valuable member of the expedition. The southern search proved more challenging than anticipated. The Vanaras traveled through diverse landscapes, from dense forests to barren wastelands, following leads that often proved false. Weeks passed without significant progress, and morale began to suffer. Some members of the party questioned whether Sita could ever be found, whether the search was anything more than a futile gesture. Hanuman refused to surrender to despair. Something within him insisted that success was possible, that the search would eventually yield results if they persevered. This conviction, which he could not fully explain, sustained him through the darkest moments of the expedition. He encouraged his companions, reminded them of their obligations, and kept the search moving forward when others would have turned back. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source. The search party encountered Sampati, an aged vulture who had lost his wings years ago in a confrontation with the sun. This Sampati possessed knowledge that would prove invaluable. He had seen Ravana carrying a woman southward, toward the island fortress of Lanka. The Demon King's destination was now known. But knowing Lanka's location created new challenges. The island lay across a vast ocean, separated from the mainland by waters that seemed impossible to cross. The Vanaras gathered on the southern shore, staring at the endless expanse of sea that blocked their path. How could they reach Lanka? How could they complete their mission when such an obstacle stood in their way? Various Vanaras offered to attempt the crossing, but none possessed the strength to leap across such a distance. The ocean stretched to the horizon and beyond, a barrier that seemed designed to mock their efforts. Despair began to settle over the group as the impossibility of their situation became clear. It was at this moment that Jambavan, an ancient bear who had joined the expedition, approached Hanuman with words that would change everything. The old warrior spoke of Hanuman's true nature, of the divine heritage that flowed through his veins, of the powers that had been sealed away by an ancient curse. He reminded Hanuman of his childhood feat, when he had leaped toward the sun itself, covering distances that should have been impossible. As Jambavan spoke, the curse that had bound Hanuman's memories began to shatter. The seals placed by the gods so long ago, designed to release at the moment of greatest need, finally gave way. Hanuman remembered who he was, what he was capable of, why he had been born. The full magnitude of his divine inheritance flooded back into his consciousness, transforming him from a capable Vanara into something far greater. The physical transformation that accompanied this awakening was dramatic. Hanuman's body began to grow, expanding beyond normal Vanara proportions until he towered over his companions. His form radiated power that made the air itself tremble. The son of Vayu, the child of the Wind God, had finally claimed his birthright. Hanuman stood at the edge of the ocean, his newly awakened powers surging through every fiber of his being. The vast expanse of water that had seemed an insurmountable barrier now appeared as merely another challenge to be overcome. The wind, responding to his divine heritage, swirled around him in eager anticipation, ready to support whatever feat he might attempt. The other Vanaras watched in awe as Hanuman prepared for his leap. The transformation they had witnessed defied everything they thought they knew about their companion. The humble, wise Vanara, who had served Sugriva so faithfully, was revealed as something far more magnificent, a being of cosmic significance whose true nature had been hidden even from himself. Hanuman's leap toward Lanka was a moment of transcendent beauty and power. He launched himself from the shore with force that shattered the rocks beneath his feet, rising into the sky like a comet ascending rather than falling. The wind embraced him, carrying him forward with speed that blurred the boundary between flight and falling. Below, the ocean churned in response to his passage, waves rising as if trying to touch the divine being passing overhead. The journey across the ocean was not without obstacles. Various beings attempted to impede Hanuman's progress, testing his resolve and his abilities. A mountain rose from the sea, offering rest, but Hanuman recognized that accepting such comfort would delay his mission. A demoness tried to swallow him whole, but Hanuman's wit proved equal to his strength, allowing him to escape through cleverness rather than force. Each challenge overcome added to his confidence and his understanding of his own capabilities. Lanka appeared on the horizon, a golden city of impossible beauty and evident menace. Ravana's fortress was everything the legends had described and more, a monument to demonic power and ambition that dominated the island it occupied. Hanuman reduced his size as he approached, understanding that stealth would serve his purposes better than overwhelming force. His mission was reconnaissance, not conquest. The infiltration of Lanka tested all of Hanuman's abilities. The city was heavily guarded, its streets patrolled by Rakshasas whose vigilance never wavered. Hanuman moved through shadows, assumed various disguises, and employed every trick he had learned during his years of education and service. His goal was singular: find Sita and confirm her location so that Rama could plan her rescue. The search through Lanka's many palaces and gardens eventually led Hanuman to the Ashoka Grove, where Sita was held prisoner. The sight of Rama's wife, dignified despite her captivity, filled Hanuman with emotions he struggled to contain. Here was the purpose of his journey, the reason for his awakening, the justification for every hardship he had endured. Hanuman revealed himself to Sita carefully, understanding that she had reason to distrust any approach in this place of enemies. He presented Rama's ring as proof of his identity and mission, explaining the alliance between Rama and Sugriva, describing the search that had led him across the ocean. Sita's joy at learning that rescue was being planned was tempered by the caution that captivity had taught her, but she accepted Hanuman's message and entrusted him with her own token to carry back to Rama. The mission could have ended there, with Hanuman returning to report his success. But something within him demanded more. The suffering he had witnessed in Lanka, the arrogance of Ravana's rule, the injustice of Sita's captivity, all called for a response that went beyond mere reconnaissance. Hanuman decided to send a message that Ravana could not ignore. The destruction that followed was calculated to demonstrate power without causing unnecessary harm to innocents. Hanuman allowed himself to be captured, then escaped in spectacular fashion, setting fire to Lanka with his own burning tail. The flames that consumed portions of the Golden City were a warning and a promise. Rama was coming, and Ravana's crimes would not go unpunished. Hanuman stood at the edge of the ocean, his newly awakened powers surging through every fiber of his being. The vast expanse of water that had seemed an insurmountable barrier now appeared as merely another challenge to be overcome. The wind, responding to his divine heritage, swirled around him in eager anticipation, ready to support whatever feat he might attempt. The other Vanaras watched in awe as Hanuman prepared for his leap. The transformation they had witnessed defied everything they thought they knew about their companion. The humble, wise Vanara, who had served Sugriva so faithfully, was revealed as something far more magnificent, a being of cosmic significance whose true nature had been hidden even from himself. Hanuman's leap toward Lanka was a moment of transcendent beauty and power. He launched himself from the shore with force that shattered the rocks beneath his feet, rising into the sky like a comet ascending rather than falling. The wind embraced him, carrying him forward with speed that blurred the boundary between flight and falling. Below, the ocean churned in response to his passage, waves rising as if trying to touch the divine being passing overhead. The journey across the ocean was not without obstacles. Various beings attempted to impede Hanuman's progress, testing his resolve and his abilities. A mountain rose from the sea, offering rest, but Hanuman recognized that accepting such comfort would delay his mission. A demoness tried to swallow him whole, but Hanuman's wit proved equal to his strength, allowing him to escape through cleverness rather than force. Each challenge overcome added to his confidence and his understanding of his own capabilities. Lanka appeared on the horizon, a golden city of impossible beauty and evident menace. Ravana's fortress was everything the legends had described, and more, a monument to demonic power and ambition that dominated the island it occupied. Hanuman reduced his size as he approached, understanding that stealth would serve his purposes better than overwhelming force. His mission was reconnaissance, not conquest. The infiltration of Lanka tested all of Hanuman's abilities. The city was heavily guarded, its streets patrolled by Rakshasas whose vigilance never wavered. Hanuman moved through shadows, assumed various disguises, and employed every trick he had learned during his years of education and service. His goal was singular: find Sita and confirm her location so that Rama could plan her rescue. The search through Lanka's many palaces and gardens eventually led Hanuman to the Ashoka Grove, where Sita was held prisoner. The sight of Rama's wife, dignified despite her captivity, filled Hanuman with emotions he struggled to contain. Here was the purpose of his journey, the reason for his awakening, the justification for every hardship he had endured. Hanuman revealed himself to Sita carefully, understanding that she had reason to distrust any approach in this place of enemies. He presented Rama's ring as proof of his identity and mission, explaining the alliance between Rama and Sugriva, describing the search that had led him across the ocean. Sita's joy at learning that rescue was being planned was tempered by the caution that captivity had taught her, but she accepted Hanuman's message and entrusted him with her own token to carry back to Rama. The mission could have ended there, with Hanuman returning to report his success. But something within him demanded more. The suffering he had witnessed in Lanka, the arrogance of Ravana's rule, the injustice of Sita's captivity, all called for a response that went beyond mere reconnaissance. Hanuman decided to send a message that Ravana could not ignore. The destruction that followed was calculated to demonstrate power without causing unnecessary harm to innocents. Hanuman allowed himself to be captured, then escaped in spectacular fashion, setting fire to Lanka with his own burning tail. The flames that consumed portions of the Golden City were a warning and a promise. Rama was coming, and Ravana's crimes would not go unpunished.